Hi, welcome. You have found your way to the Backyard Habitat Plant Species presentation. My name is Mitch Bixby. I'm a early detection rapid response guy for the city of Portland at the Bureau of Environmental Services. Essentially, that means I'm trying to get a handle on newly arrived invasive plant species before they become a huge issue, kind of a stitch in time saves nine approach. I've been working with the Backyard Habitat folks for many years now, and they are a critical ally for the work that I do. Since I work alone within the city, I have colleagues in other organizations, but within the boundaries of Portland, which is about 130 square miles, mostly I'm it. And so having this kind of a resource, you all, to do some of the scouting and to watch out for both species that we're worried about and species that we don't even know are here yet is super, super valuable. So thank you. I'm going to spend about an hour talking about these plants. First couple of minutes are going to be urban ecology. We'll get into some definitions. We'll get into the invasion curve. We'll talk about the target species for the bulk of the time. And then we'll wrap up with a little bit of discussion about additional resources. So ecology is not that old of a discipline. It really got going in the 40s and 50s. Essentially, the question of ecology is how do all these various pieces work with each other? Not just plants and animals, but very often environmental systems as well, sun, water, nutrients. And for a long, long time, ecology was being done in mostly intact systems. The cities were seen as kind of throwaway areas. There was no ecology in cities. But that started to change in the late 80s and into the mid 90s. In Portland in 1988, an old landfill that was a Portland park for many years was officially recognized as a wildlife refuge, and it became Oaks Bottom Wildlife Refuge. A lot of work was being done. A lot of birds were being observed. Other kinds of natural systems were occurring within the boundaries of the city, and that got a lot of people excited. And Oaks Bottom was the result. Not long after that, we started to hear from the No Ivy League, another Portland Parks institution at this point, trying to get a handle on invasive plant species. And that's sparked a whole range of discussions across the city. At about the same time, nationally, the network of long-term ecological research stations, which had been focused in like Wind River Forest in Gifford Pinchot or H.J. Andrews down near Eugene. These were important ecological research centers. But in 1994, I believe, Baltimore and Phoenix were added as LTER urban cities for doing urban ecology research. It was recognized that there was actually quite a lot going on in cities. It's somewhat more complicated, given that there are people and structures and other kinds of systems not normally found in nature that complicate things. But it was recognized that there were lots of interesting scientific questions to ask and lots of natural resources to protect. In about 2007, 2008, many organizations in the Portland area, including the city of Portland, created positions to try to address invasive plant species. Not fully, but in a limited way. Early detection rapid response, or EDRR, was one way of using limited resources to try to head off larger issues by dealing with them while they were still small. So many soil and water conservation districts added EDRR positions. The city added one. And at about this time, the Backyard Habitat Certification Program emerged. Also recognizing that there's quite a lot of ecological activity going on in cities. Fragmented, though it often is, we can also, if you look closely, and you don't have to look all that closely, you can see all sorts of interesting, good things going on in backyards across Portland. And so the habitat certification was seen as a way to start to aggregate and also encourage property owners, aggregate these properties, encourage property owners to take a little bit more interest and do just a little bit extra on behalf of not just the things that are flying through, which is certainly a real thing in the Portland area, but but also to help out the plants and animals and insects that are already here. So this is a super exciting partnership. It has been all along, and I thank you for volunteering to do this work. It's pretty. It inspires me, and it's pretty exciting. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about definitions because this is a thing that comes up all the time. What is an invasive plant? Is it a weed? Is it just a plant that's not supposed to be here? Well, all of those things are kind of true. I've taken 4 definitions, 3 from an executive order that was issued in 1999 at the end of the Clinton administration, discussing invasive plant species, actually a federal executive order discussing invasive plants. It's a big deal. And it describes native species as plants or any species that evolved in a particular area that historically occur in that particular habitat. And exotic is not that. Species that did not occur, did not evolve in that particular habitat. Invasive is sort of a subset of exotic. Exotic, non-native, the vast majority of these species are of no ecological concern. They do not take over. They play well. I shouldn't say this. Play well with others. I try not to anthropomorphize plants if I can possibly help it. They are species that do not create issues in terms of resource monopolizing, et cetera, et cetera. A small subset of exotic species are considered invasive, and that's the 3rd definition. They cause or potentially could cause environmental or economic harm or harm to human health. And that is generally how I refer to the plants, the plant species that I work on as invasive. Noxious is an even smaller subset of invasive. Everything that's on a noxious list is considered invasive, but this is a legal term within the state of Oregon and Washington that requires a species to be quarantined. You can't import it, transport it, propagate it, or sell it. You can't move it. You can't send it out of state. You can't grow it for sale. And there are both state lists and federal lists. There's not much on the federal list that I work on, but the state list is a little bit more relevant to what we do. So noxious is a hard word to use because it has these specific legal meanings. Invasive plant species is generally the phrase that we use, not just because they are in the wrong place or that they're from somewhere else. That's not really the issue. The issue is that these plant species, they disrupt and change ecosystems. Given enough time, and it doesn't always need to be a lot of time, these species will crowd out other plants. They will exclude seedlings of trees, so you get no forest regeneration. They take the light, they take the nutrients, they take the water, whatever. Here's a list of some of the ways that non-native plants can become invasive ecosystem changers. And once they've done that, once they've monopolized the system, it's very, very difficult to get those systems to be anything other than that. They end up being a monoculture that persists until we don't know when. given that ecology is not that old of a scientific discipline, we don't really have a good sense of how long these monocultures would persist. And the truth is that most of the monocultures that we worry about are relatively recent phenomena. So this is a bit of an unknown thing, but there's an expectation that leaving things alone to fix themselves is a proposition that we probably think of in terms of hundreds or thousands of years rather than species would have to evolve out from underneath the species in question. So from a practical standpoint, we try to catch plants while they're still on the left-hand side of this curve. Between detection and public awareness typically begins. Those two arrows are the real rough boundaries of effective EDRR, early detection. If we can catch it then, we minimize the amount of work, we minimize the amount of resources, we minimize the amount of replanting, and we minimize the amount of soil disruption of people stomping around. The bigger the patch, the more people involved, the more digging or spraying or replanting, that ends up being a disturbance event in itself, which then, of course, encourages new things to come in, and that becomes a difficult cycle to break. So the hope is we can catch things way over on the left at the detection point and do a quick survey everywhere, find it, remove it, and remove this from our long-term list of things to worry about. So let's talk about plants. There are three lists: the silver, the gold, the platinum. I don't know where these came from, but here's the list. We've got 17 species on the silver list. That's quite a lot. Another 14, I think, or 15 on the gold list, and then another 10 on the platinum list, although half of those are restating the 5 tree species listed in gold because they are those are trees that are taller than 20 feet. So I just want to say this is a lot. I'm going to go pretty fast. I will not go into a lot of detail, but there's a ton of resources out there. I will list some of those for you at the end of this talk. Of course, if there's ever you're ever in a position where you feel like, hey, I want to know more about what this is to do an ID, then there are people all over the place, and certainly at the Backyard Habitat, on the Backyard Habitat staff, who would be willing to answer questions about what is this, or what do we do with it, all the rest. Overwhelmingly, and actually there's no exceptions to this, everyone would prefer to hear a question, discuss it, figure out more about it, and decide, yeah, you know what, this is a species that's known to us, or it's not that big of a deal, or we know this patch, we're working on it. All of these things this is almost always how these conversations go. That's fine. Everyone's very happy with that. Where things where people get unhappy is when there are patches that we don't know are out there, and folks just decide, yeah, it's probably. If you're unsure, we always prefer that we hear from you. And if there are species that are out there that nobody knows, you all are the first way we're going to hear about it. So take that seriously and check in with folks. Last bit on plant life cycles. I'll be talking about plants that are annual, biennial, and perennial. Annuals, they live for 1 year and then die. They make a ton of seed. It's how they survive. It's how their species adapts and continues. For some species, they make so many seed that they become an invasive species. Biennial are often in that same category. They have frequently a rosette form. They emerge in the spring. They exist as a rosette for the summer through the next winter, and then they'll emerge in the spring the following year as a flowering seeding plant. Garlic mustard is a well-known species that's a biennial. The perennials are a little bit different in that they exist year after year after year. Rather than making a bunch of seed like the annuals and biennials, they more frequently invest heavily in root structures. They store a lot of their energy in their roots, and so they are difficult to remove and deal with because of that. Most of the species I work on are actually perennials. Here we go. The silverweeds. Starting with the easy ones. Blackberry, ivy, and clematis. Ugh. Next slide. No, I'm kidding. The blackberry, these are well known. They're very pokey. Their leaves have 5 leaflets arranged like an open palm, palmate. Everyone loves the berries, but they tend to make great big thickets and shade out everything else. They seem to have a better capacity for dealing with lower water levels than other species, so they use that to their advantage. They're known for being very tall and will often cane over where they grow a great big long stem that then gets so tall that it tips over from its own weight, and the top then becomes the new root system. Ingenious. The ivies are well known as well. There is a bit of discussion in that most of what we call English ivy is probably Irish ivy, but I don't think there's a lot of point in quibbling about that. It is invasive. It makes all sorts of big tangles up in trees and high centers them so that they snap off, or it just smothers them. What is maybe less well known about the ivies is that there are 2 forms. The familiar form with these points, that is the juvenile or immature version of it. The more adult, more mature form occurs when it gets enough sun. And this is the part that is not always well known, is that ivy in sun will go to flower and then fruit. Whether that's on the ground or at the top of a tree is completely irrelevant. I've lost track of how many times I've tripped over a flowering, fruiting ivy that was just lying on the ground in a big patch of sun. So the fact that it has to be up in a tree is a myth. It will also change its leaf form to this pointed palmate version to something that's a little bit more like an oval. And that is also not as well known. I've been told that it's not ivy. Look, the leaf isn't right, but it's just the mature form. And clematis grows really fast. I've seen it overtaking an overwhelming ivy that was overwhelming a tree. It tends to have 5 to 7, sometimes 9 leaflets, which is kind of the giveaway, as opposed to kudzu. Every kudzu report I've ever gotten has turned out to be clematis, which is fine. I certainly appreciate that folks are interested. But clematis is old man's beard or traveler's joy. It looks like it's dead in the winter, but if you were to cut open those brown stems you can see on that picture, they would be green inside. When they are done flowering, they form these little puff balls, and they have an uncanny knack for putting their root systems underneath the hedge in your yard. I don't know how they do it, but they do, which makes it very, very difficult to get out. So these guys are a little bit less, spurge laurel is a little less well known. It's Daphne laureola. It's neither Daphne nor a laurel. It's neither spurge nor a laurel. It's a Daphne. Doesn't smell particularly great. And it's quite unobtrusive. It has these thick, glossy leaves that look a little bit like rhododendron. They tend to grow under rhododendron or Douglas fir. They like that kind of duffy soil. The difference between spurge laurel and rhododendron, though, is that the flowers tend to be underneath the leaves, whereas for rhododendron, the flowers tend to be on top of the leaves. And they tend to be bigger. Those leaves are not super large. They make these clusters of little chartreuse, unimpressive flowers. They're just not that. But if they get out into the natural area, as has been demonstrated in, I think, Polk and Yamhill counties, actually a little bit in West Multnomah County as well, they take over the understory. So you'll see these scattered all over northeast Portland, some in Southwest as well. They are a pain. Watch out for the sap. It can give you a pretty nasty rash, but not super uncommon. Scots broom, very common. Scots broom is in the pea family, so it has the classic pea-shaped flower. Almost everything you've got with the yellow flower these days is going to be Scots broom. End of the summer, you don't want to stand too close because the pods blow up. You get seeds in your eye. And the seeds are they're pretty tough. They last 70, 75 years in the soil. Yellow archangel is an interesting one. This is a species that was not really being grown as a plant to show, but those greens ended up in hanging baskets and as a filler, as a kind of filler plant. The variegation is a nice accent. But people were throwing it out in the backyard and they were getting great big patches. And about 3, 4, 5 years ago, I've lost track, yellow archangel was listed by the Oregon Department of Agriculture as a noxious weed. So it is no longer legal to sell it or grow it or import it. It is a quarantinable species, technically, although there are fines as well. Mostly this is one that moves around by fragments and roots, but it does have the capacity to make viable seed, and I've seen it seeding in some strange places. Also, you should be aware that just because it's the variegation has been bred into it, which means it can also breed itself out. So the white shading along the edges of the leaves is not diagnostic. That's not required. It's very, very typical, but you may likely find yellow archangel that does not have that. Does not mean it is not yellow archangel. It is. Knotweed is a tough one. This is a species that has gone to kind of an extreme on having really tough root systems. This is kind of what I was thinking of when I was describing perennials a few minutes ago. Knotweed can be 8 feet, 10 feet tall. It's got a bamboo-y like stem, hollow, can be pretty stout, but it has these wide spade-shaped leaves. The Japanese knotweed is probably 8 inches long. The hybrid knotweed is probably 1 foot long, and the giant knotweed is probably 1 foot across. Those are big leaves. They make a ton of showy white flowers in September, and they're very, very difficult to manage, knotweeds. This is one that may require some sort of herbicide. I would not recommend digging this one. Like many plants, they will, digging invigorates them. They feel that it is an attack, and they are right, which will inspire them to grow new plants from all of the ends of all of the root tips. And so this is one to be really cautious about. Garlic mustard. So this is, I think, the only biennial in the presentation. When they emerge in the spring, their seedlings look like these roundish leaves on the left. They have a nice scalloped edge. They have this big indentation where the stem comes off the back of the leaf. And they'll last like that through the full next year. If they survive, they'll get to March and April. The days will get longer, the weather will get warmer, and they'll start to bolt. And they'll go from that round leaf to something a little bit more triangular, which you can kind of see in the middle picture. And then they'll go to full-fledged flowering. You can see on the right-hand side of the right-hand picture, those leaves are starting to look pretty triangular. Same kind of a scalloped edge, but not nearly so round. They're also not particularly furry. In the rosette stage, garlic mustard can be mistaken for all sorts of things, but mostly saxifrages, mostly fringe cup or monkey flower, or not a saxifrage, but nipplewort. The seedlings, the teeny tiny ones often look like nipplewort to people. But garlic mustard is a classic mustard. Four petals is a diagnostic for mustards. The white petals are relatively uncommon, although there are a lot of mustard species around. Anything that's flowering before the middle of March is not garlic mustard. That is a cardamom, most likely a popweed or artillery weed. They tend to be fairly short, 6 to 8 to 12 inches. Garlic mustard typically is about waist high. I've also seen it taller than me. I'm 6 feet. I've also seen it very short. I've seen 1-inch plants with flowers on them. Plastics, garlic mustards are known for having really plastic genetics, which means that there's all sorts of variability that we see. This is a plant that makes a ton of seed. Classic species being dragged around by the mud in our tires. You get seeds in the winter, in the mud in the winter, and you track them around. Very typical. This is substantially on the west side of Portland. On the east side, there's a little bit in the Johnson Creek drainage. But then you get further east, you get to Troutdale and Corbett, and the East Multnomah Soil and Water folks have actually quarantined Corbett. They don't do any work in there. They've drawn a line around it with all of their work being dedicated to controlling populations that are ejecting from that central. They've got a ton of garlic mustard, so a thing to be aware of. American pokeweed. This is one that's sometimes called in as knotweed. It's about the same height, can be quite tall, with a very nice spade-shaped leaf. Very distinctive pink stem. Once you get past the middle of the summer and into the fall, you'll see the stem get increasingly pink till it's this hot pink. It's quite attractive, actually. And then the berries will turn this dark purple, almost black color. This is a species that also, like knotweed, makes a ton of really tough roots. And so digging it out is doable. It's a lot of work, and you should commit yourself to several years to doing it. It's also a species that can be toxic. Not necessarily fatally so, but it can make you really sick. So this is one that we are trying to get a handle on, partly for that reason, but also understanding that it makes great big thickets in other parts of the world, and we would rather it not get into our natural areas. Yellow flag iris is one that has been making the rounds. It's not super common, but it's common enough in some drainages in the Southwest. There's also quite a lot of it at the rhododendron garden around the lake there. It gets to be quite tall. It's quite showy, but makes a ton of seed, and it's quite durable. And while we're in the Willamette riparian corridor, purple loosestrife, which was also in the picture of Oaks Bottom, if you happen to notice it. This is a picture, I believe, of Oaks Bottom. I could be wrong about that. This is a huge problem in the Midwest. It is widespread in this part of the world. We have a bunch of it in Sauvie Island. We've got a bunch of it upstream. So a lot of the Willamette system has purple loosestrife. It can be quite tall. I've seen it over my head. Square stem, little purple flowers, very pretty. Makes a ton of seed. This is one that's got a couple of biocontrols working on it that have been fairly successful in our other parts of the world. Oaks Bottom, it's been hot and cold. So we'll see how that changes now that the hydrology has been reworked. This will be the first spring freshet for the new Oaks Bottom project. Policeman's helmet and giant hogweed. These are actually both early detection species. These I work on wherever I find them in Portland. We don't have a ton of policeman's helmet. Again, a very tall plant, very showy. I've seen it in a couple of gardens as show plants. They have very often this bright pink flower, but I've seen it as a very pale, almost white flower. Most impatient species have some kind of a spur off the back. I'll show you more on a different species later. You can see there's almost no spur on this plant. It's very short and it's bent over the back of the flower. That's pretty close to diagnostic for this one. Giant hogweed is a surprisingly difficult species to identify. Almost always the calls I get for giant hogweed are for poison hemlock, which also gets quite tall, which also has an a purple blotchy stem. But hogweed has that, poison hemlock has that, and the native cow parsnip has that. So that's a bad way to identify for sure that you've got giant hogweed. For me, the size of the leaf is a dead giveaway. That's one of my former colleagues from ODA, holding one leaf. You can see it's about 4 feet across. Cow parsnip leaves tend to be about 2.5 feet across, big, but not like that. They're also not nearly as deeply lobed as the one that he's holding. It's a plant, obviously it makes a ton of seed, and the sap can make your skin completely sensitive to UV. So you end up getting sunburns that get sunburns that get sunburns. I actually talked to a guy that got some on his leg, and he said that he was still getting sunburns on that spot 5 and 6 years later. So that's something to be watching for. I should say that I'm wearing a glove, a clear plastic glove on my left hand that I'm holding the stem with. Just for the record, I'm not holding onto that barehanded. This is a species that we're finding all over Portland, but we've got probably 80, 90 sites, and maybe 5 of them have any plants on them at all. So this is a bit of a success story that I'm happy to say. But we find a new patch every year or two at some odd corner of town. So it's not that it's not around. It's certainly showing, and people bring it to each other and say, hey, look how great this plant is, not realizing. So it's around. This is the last of the silver weeds. Orange hawkweed is super obvious when it's in flower and almost impossible to find when it's not. That stem is going to be 8 inches, maybe as much as 12 inches. It's not a super huge plant. The flower looks like nothing else. It's a very, very, very hairy plant. Very long hairs. And this is not a thing I would expect most people to have a lot of familiarity with, the various hair lengths of dandelion species. There's quite a range, and if you spend any time looking at orange hogweed, you will eventually develop an eye for this. For your sake, I hope you don't. But it's out there. When it flowers and goes to seed, it forms a little puffball that's maybe a 1/2 inch across. And then those seeds blow around. I've found little patches of this all around town in every quadrant. The bulk of the hawkweed that I know of is in Clackamas County and getting up into the passes. This is an east side species. And the Oregon Department of Agriculture has actually spent quite a lot of time bringing in crews to work with the hawkweed they're finding up in the Cascades. It's a big deal for them. The knapweeds are similarly unobtrusive. They have kind of gray-green rosettes with a lot of deep lobes on them. They're not super big. They're probably 4 to 6 inches across, typically. Hard to see. And they're going to be in places that have really poor soil. Rocky, gravelly, well-drained, dry places. More east side species. The knapweeds we see most are the spotted and the diffuse. Meadow knapweed is a little bit bigger, but not much bigger. And these are species that if you think you've got them, if you suspect them, I wouldn't spend a bunch of time trying to figure it all out. I would just call somebody. All right. We should probably have a little bit of music in here. Some, I don't know, cat video or something, but all right, take a drink of water and we'll move on to the next one. The gold species. And these are species that there's an expectation that a little more effort will be required. That you're going a little bit beyond getting these taken care of. So Herb Robert and Shining Geranium are both annuals. They make a ton of seed. You will want to be pulling them 2 or 3 or 4 times a year because they have that many crops. They tend to fill in all of the understory and choke out all the little herbaceous things that we think are interesting. They tend to have a red stem. Anything with a red stem is probably fair game. They have little pink 5-petaled flowers. And Herb Robert in particular has this carroty, lacy leaf that smells terrible to some people, but looks quite a lot like Pacific bleeding heart, which is a native herbaceous species. You can see though that the flowers look nothing like each other. And so in the growing season, this is not a mistake you're likely to make. The next few species are herbaceous perennials. Lesser celandine is a species that emerges in late February, maybe earlier, and will last as long as early April. They are extremely difficult to manage, and so that is, I think, one reason why they're on the gold list. Being able to keep it contained is, I think, a reasonable goal for any homeowner, and not necessarily easy either. Japanese butterbur is pretty rare, as is false brome, I should say. There are only a handful of patches that I know and around. They have a lot of lookalikes, other kinds of cousins. This species in particular has a very large leaf. I like this picture because you can see, oh, yep, that's a pretty big, that's probably 1.5 feet or 2 feet across. Italian arum is another species that's very difficult to manage and relatively common in the city. For whatever reason, people buy it and they decide they don't like it and they chuck it out in the world. And so those clusters of orange berries get picked up by birds and get scattered around. And even without those fruiting clusters, the plants have a pretty strong capacity for moving themselves around and forming new little bulblets. So this is one that I'm actually in the middle of a couple of discussions on how do we actually manage this stuff? Nobody really knows for sure. False brome is an interesting one. It's not one that we see a ton of. The grasses are very difficult to ID. This one is a bunch grass. It doesn't tend to crawl along the ground like the crab grasses or the quack grasses, but it makes a bunch of seed, and the seed has long hairs that can grab your socks or your clothes or your dog's legs or a deer's fur. They also get dropped on the ground and they get mixed in with the dirt, and anyone who's going by, say in a logging truck. This is a species that's a huge issue in the mid-Willamette Valley, Sweet Home in Lebanon. Great big long patches just going along logging roads for miles and miles. It's just being dragged along by traffic. It's very soft, has very soft leaves, and you can see in this picture, the little picture inset, that the seed heads are attached directly to the stem. It gives it a pretty unusual look. Most grass species have their seed heads attached to a little stem that then is attached to the main stem. So there's a secondary stem and then there's the primary stem. These seed heads are attached directly to the primary stem, or with such a tiny secondary stem as to be not really noticeable. So a bunch grass, with seed heads attached to the stem with really soft leaves could be false brome. It's one of the ones that gets plenty of false IDs, mistaken identities. That's fine. I'd rather know for sure that we've got a pretender than skip a patch that we really could have gotten on top of. Hedge bindweed is the one that we're mostly seeing in the Portland area, also known as morning glory. Field bindweed has a much smaller flower and is more of a pasture weed, more of a pasture concern. Hedge bindweed is appearing in everybody's landscape all over the Portland area, and it's really difficult to manage. It's an interesting thing to put in the shrubby perennial category because it doesn't really have any woody tissue, but it does have really substantial roots. I don't know of any certain way of managing it other than digging it all the time. Pampas grass is a difficult one to ID. It is often mistaken for Jubata grass. I personally couldn't tell you how to tell the difference between the two. Functionally, neither seems to be doing the kinds of things here that they do in the central California coast, where the hillsides go on for miles with nothing but pampas grass. That hasn't occurred in the Portland area, which doesn't mean that it can't. But I think pampas grass is on the better safe than sorry list. There's no good reason to have it. If something changes, the conditions change, and we suddenly have it all over the place, we're going to be stuck. And butterfly bush is a little bit in the same category, although it has proven itself in drainages, particularly in the Clackamas area, where it's kind of taken over. It depends on the plant. Some plants don't seem to create a lot of sprouts and offshoots, and some just really do. And there's no questioning when you cut it down, you're going to see another one there the same year. They have very, very robust root systems. This is one that I think we would prefer, again, to have gone, but it's not, I think, essential to have a functioning backyard habitat. So here we are on the 5 tree species. The 2 on this page are, of course, the black locust and the English hawthorn. Both of these are pretty pokey. The black locust is also in the pea family. It's a legume. It is a nitrogen-fixing plant, and it has these leaves with 9 to 11 to 15 sometimes leaflets. Kind of like the knotweed, when you cut it down, the roots go berserk. And so this is one to be cautious of. Even less than 20 feet tall, you may end up with a little thicket of new little black locust trees. Hawthorn does something similar, but not to the same extent. It has fairly distinctive, to me, little almost oak-like leaves. They have no particular pattern other than they're maybe an inch high, an inch wide, and have lots of little lobes. They have big sprays of white flowers in the spring and that turn into red berries. I think the flowers don't smell very good, but that's just maybe me. And they do make all sorts of thickets. There was a great big patch of it on Powell Butte once upon a time that's been removed. Chokes out everything. English holly is a species that is frequently mistaken for Oregon grape. It has the same roughly oval leaf with pokey edges. Holly is a little bit different in that it's actually a stiffer, tougher leaf, pokier spines, and they frequently have one up, one down, one up, one down as you go around the edge of the leaf. My neighbor has this, so I've gotten a good look at the at the leaves that fall. They hurt. I don't like them. And they make big thickets. This is yet another species that when you cut it down, you may well expect to have a collection of new little plants to replace the central stem. In fact, maple is the same, Norway maple is the same way, and tree of heaven is the same way. None more so than tree of heaven. But that's a like I said, an important strategy for survival of plants when they feel like they are under attack. They will make a bunch of new plants. Norway maple is a reasonably common street tree. It has, you can see the various points, both at the ends of the lobes and intermediate on the sides of the fingers of the palm, in ways that you don't see on a big leaf maple, which is shown below it. Also, the lobes are not nearly as deep on the Norway maple as they are in the big leaf maple. And the seeds, the samaras, are attached in a line as opposed to in a V, like you can see below. And tree of heaven is the last of the tree species. There's no topping it. It is certainly the most aggressive tree species that we have in the Portland area, and I just could not recommend enough to get rid of it as quickly as you can, as safely as you can. It grows very fast, it makes a bunch of seed, and it has the capacity for growing new plants out of all of its root ends. So that's a thing to watch out for. All right. The platinum waits. So these are species that, again, they're fairly common. It would be, I think, preferable for yards not to have them. People may not even know that they do have them. Fennel can be complicated because sometimes it has the clumping root and sometimes it has the spreading root. I'm sorry, bulb. Vinca, was also pitched as a possible alternative to ivy when ivy was finally banned outright, probably 10 years ago. There was a resurgence in vinca as a ground cover. It's not great. It doesn't hop around in the way that some of these other plants do. It doesn't seed and escape. It does fill in the space. It does choke out anything else. But that presents other kinds of risks for other kinds of creatures. Having bare ground is actually really nice. That's an ethic that's not always super. That's not always popular. But from a habitat perspective, vinca eliminates the bare ground. English laurel, a really, really common hedge species. It's not surprising to find this all over the city because it's a way for people to block the view of the neighbors. Is it the best choice ecologically? No. Is it actually a lot of work to have? Yeah, it is. Cutting it, you can cut it straight down to the roots, and you'll have a functioning hedge by the end of the next year. So this is not a great choice, although it does seem to be still pretty popular. Reed canary grass, I don't expect you'll find a lot of this in backyards, but you could. This is another species that would be better to have out. It does raise concerns, particularly in larger restoration projects, about is the removal worth the cost, or is it better to try to live with it in some way? Eradication of reed canary grass is generally considered a long shot. And then again, the trees. That is the end of our plant list. reiterating the preference for early detection. How can we catch stuff before it becomes a huge problem? Some other species you might want to be aware of. These are species that I'm working on that are not on the lists. Milk thistle, super pokey, super tall, super nasty. Oblong spurge, one of a zillion kinds of spurge, but this is the only one that's got woody stems. Particularly nasty sap. We're seeing it increasingly around the east side of Portland. West side too. Goat's rue. Yet another pea family plant. It looks a little bit like a vetch, but instead of crawling along the ground like a vetch does, it has a stem, 5-6 feet tall. And the leaflets will have, instead of a tendril, like a vetch does, it will have an actual leaflet. Lots of purple flowers, very pretty, very long-lived seed, 30, 40 years. Puncture vine is one that we're finding a little bit in the industrial north. It likes lousy, gravelly, well-drained soils, like some of the other species we've talked about. It's very flat and very unobtrusive, but it makes these spikes that will put a hole in your bike tire. It will make your dog yelp. They hurt. Getting them even in your hand is not my favorite thing. So there's not a ton of this. This is one we're definitely on the watch for. And then a couple species of impatiens. You can see here that the plants have a really distinct spur off the back, which is unlike what we're seeing with the impatiens glandulifera, the policeman's helmet. This is bicolor. We know of this in a couple of drainages. One drainage in Southwest. Apparently there's a big patch out in East Multnomah County as well. And Balfouri isn't listed anywhere, but we've seen it taking off in natural areas. And so this is actually a watched species according to the ODA, and may go off the list that's available for sale, may go on the list of quarantinable species in the next year or two. We'll see. So here are some of your options. This is not comprehensive, but if you're looking to get some information about plants, these are some places you can go, either to find out more about it, to know who is working on it, to maybe make a report, get some more insight on the ecology of those plants. It's a good place it's a good list to start from. Thank you for doing this work.